Alright, hello, welcome back to What's New with Fight Rising. And today we have an update. Well, I mean, it's been out for a while now, released November 2nd, or 22nd, um, where we get a new ancient breed, the Undertide. And I was just gonna take a moment to go over the update with you guys and read the lore update for it all. So, deep beneath the waves, the silence calls. So we get this new Undertide ancient breed, very much a water type ancient. They're voluntarily estranged from their deity and the world. Undertide dragons have found a new family deep beneath the waves. When the Tide Lord falls silent, they emerge to aid in the search for the sake of dragonkind and their found family. And then here are some of the unique genes that we get for the Undertide, very aquatically themed, very appropriate for the new breed. And then some parallel genes. Next, I guess we'll go to Echoes of the Deep and read through that. So, Echoes of the Deep, we thought we found something, but something found us. Written by Aquioran. Under the tides we ruled, in Tide Lord's name, that omniscient fool. Under the tides we turned from him, the Tide Lord we spurned. Under the tides we roamed, on our own, seeking home, away from him. When the great maelstrom had ripped through the Tide Lord's territory, it was a storm of historic ferocity. Coastal layers were rendered uninhabitable, clans scattered, and the dragons of water were left to rebuild in the wake of both the storm and their deity's disappearance. While the seers continued their search within the trench for Tide Lord, an old, nearly lost trade emerged within the general population. Marine salvaging had previously fallen out of practice after several generations, as the battles between elements waned and the clan settled into routine and contentment along the shores of the sea. Over time, with this renewed interest, the salvage hobbyists became specialists, with crews regularly diving the depths of the sea for salvage, usable materials and valuables swept out to sea and lost by the great storm. The more adventurous crews worked their way into the Leviathan trench itself, where they made an unexpected discovery, one astounding enough to pull the Dragon Home Preservations Guild focuses away from the Great Worm's breach. Excitement coursed through Gilly, from the head to the tips of her tail fins. Since entering the vast trench connecting the open seas to the inland waters, they'd sighted multiple stretches of countless fossils. Fossils the deep could use. Tsuna will be thrilled. And most importantly, with them came dragons. Hidden within a crevice along the trench wall, out of sight from the numerous dragons surrounding the fossils, Gilly floated amongst the camouflaging sea flora, strategically sounding the gathered group of dragons calling themselves a preservation guild. Lost in the sensory story of the echoes, the Marin scout nearly floated headfirst into the cave wall. Before Gilly could cry out in response, Nen was there with his hand over her mouth, muffling any sound that might have given away their location. The veteran scout hauled Gilly into an upright position before frantically checking her helm and gear. Satisfied that her gear was neither cracked nor the fit compromised, his dark eyes briefly relaxed, though his mouth remained a grim line. If Gilly's armor had cracked, if its position had moved even a hair from where the Tsuna and the others had fit them, the magic protecting Gilly's body from the from the radical shift in sea pressure would have failed. Gilly reached out and placed her hand on Nen's chest, singing a quiet apology. She would be more careful. Besides, if she succumbed during this important scouting trip, Tsuna would never forgive her. With the confirmation of dragons deeper in the trench and their focus on the fossil site to guarantee they weren't going anywhere anytime soon, it was time to return home and report. If Undertide elders intend to use the newly exposed material to produce equilibrium fossils for the greater abysmal marine population, they are going to have to make contact with the shallow seas dragons. The two abyssal marine slipped from their hiding place, taking care not to make any noise to draw the attention of the dragons fussing over the fossils. What they didn't anticipate needing to avoid were other Marin so close to dragonkind. A trio of trident-wielding Marin emerged from the shadows of the rock wall as the two abyssal scouts tried to dive under the approaching warriors. More Marin appeared, driving them back up and surrounding them. Nen scowled, stopped short as he reached for his pack. As for Gilly, well, she was equal parts terrified and thrilled. The two were ill-prepared to take on 6 well-armed Marin, and they needed to return home with their reports. But also, there were 6 shallow seas Marin in front of her. Gilly's eyes drank in the brightly colored warriors, a sight she'd never thought she would encounter. Gilly kept her arms outspread in a non-threatening position and opened her mouth. We are friends. Kin. The lead Marin's eyes narrowed suspiciously. We are from far, deep, lost. She paused. The words were coming easier, and she thanked the elder council's foresight in teaching her the ancient speech, should her explorations in the upper reaches ever required it. But this part could get a little choppy. We seek the water's song. Our family no longer hears the water god. 2 of the other shallows Marin behind them made strangled noises, while their leader continued to consider Gilly, her eyes boring through her. The schools are troubled by that one silence as well. Her tone was blunt. What do you know? Where did you really come from? Do you really expect us to believe you're from the lost school? She'd yet to lower her spear from Gilly's throat. Gilly slowly shook her head again. From the corner of her eye, she could see Nen had managed to slip his hand into the side satchel without notice. We are friends, kin from the deep. She dropped her gaze to the weapon at her throat and back up to the Marin leader. The spear pulled back slightly. We must return home. Please tell the dragons the Undertide are troubled. They wish to seek a reunion with their kin. Tell the schools we are no longer lost. The brightly hued warrior's eyes widened in horror and disgust. Talk to the dragons? Are you out of your mind? The lead Marin's tone was incredulous. Tell them yourself. After our school is through with you trespassers. Gilly shook her head sadly. Tsuna and Mother had warned her she might not receive the welcome she had hoped for. We must return home. Tell the dragons. The Undertide must return. She whistled sharply, and on cue, Nen smashed open the shell he now held in his hand, releasing Tsuna's spell. The abyssal Marin's bodies erupted with a flash of light, blinding their surrounding captors. Ancient magic now enveloped Gilly and Nen. giving their skin and scales an eerie, iridescent glow and gifting their bodies with incredible speed. It was this same speed that allowed them to turn the years-long journey from the deep chasms into mere weeks. "Do not try to follow us," Gilly called back to the confused Marin from deeper within the trench. She punctuated her warning with a pleading song. "The depths will crush you if you do." Nen whistled a warning and pointed to something behind the shallow seas Marin. Now the dragons were aware of their presence, and they were moving towards them with purpose. The pair weren't supposed to release the swift fin spell so close to dragonkind. They had to make the last leg of their long swim here without the spell just to be safe. The two turned to begin their journey home, speeding away into the deepest depths of the trench and out to the open seas. Just had arrived at the outer edge of the deep when two massive glowing eyes appeared, followed by a leviathan head. The rest of the dragon's form was lost to the darkness. "Gillian," the dragon rumbled before wiggling its frills in relieved annoyance. "You're late, sister." Gilly trilled a series of joyful notes. Of course Tsuna would be waiting for them. "I'm sorry, Tsuna, but we were seen. There were just too many eyes to avoid," Gilly apologized through clicks and song vibrations. "But the equilibrium fossils you and the other Undertide researchers constructed performed wonderfully, and the swift fin spell saved us from capture." Tsuna scoffed at Gilly's botched scouting mission, but couldn't hide the flush of pride at the praise of her inventions. "Come, I'll take you both to the Elder Council to give your report. Mother's practically beside herself with worry, and the sooner you're home, the better." The two Marin quickly moved under the wings of the massive dragon, grabbing hold of the edge, pulling her wings in tight to shelter her sister and companion from the swift currents of her high speed. Tsuna dove into the winding cavern that could take them the rest of the way home. Gilly swam slow circles around Tsuna's head, sending soothing waves of sound with the gentle currents towards her sister. The dragon's frills continued to twitch with agitation from their meeting with the Elder Council. The Undertide elders of the council had withdrawn their support of their return to the Tide Lord's territory. They'd been willing to throw away years of Tsuna's equilibrium research and work over an ancient grievance. There were those who could not bear the reality of meeting their replacements, and that is what many of their number thought of these modern dragons ultimately were. As far as Tsuna was concerned, the elders were naught but willful, petulant hatchlings who needed to be taught to adapt. Gilly barely managed to stop her sister from expanding on that thought during this meeting. Tsuna had been excused quite abruptly, and Gilly escorted back to home. Gilly escorted her back home, where they waited for Nen to update them. Their mother fussed over them until she was satisfied both her daughters were safe, whole, and fed. Upon Nen's arrival, the trio retreated up to Tsuna's and Gilly's shared cavern to learn what transpired after they left the council. According to Nen, the Marin elders miraculously bought their dragon counterparts around. There was no denying that the undertide of the deep changed the day the Tide Lord's song disappeared from the currents. An uneasy quiet had fallen through the city, where most undertide were too prideful to admit it. Their currents and echoes were filled with profound fear. Their Marin families and friends didn't care one whit about dragon pride, and as one confronted the council demanding they get to the bottom of this issue. Satisfied they weren't going to be held back on the sudden whim of ossified personalities too afraid of change, Tsuna settled in to rest under Gilly's woven hammock. But in her heart she remained troubled. She may have hatched long after the two populations blended, but the sounds and songs of Tide Lord, as he called out in the deep, were much part of her as they were the elders. His silence created a deep sense of unease, one that had left her emotions on a perpetual talent's point. Gilly, she quietly rumbled. Are you awake? Her Marin sister sent a soothing sound to her in response. Can you please sing me Mother's lullaby? The one she sang when she found my egg? Gilly slipped from the hammock and floated down to her sister's head, draped across the top of Tsuna's head so that hers rested in the space above the dragon's eyes. Gilly began to sing and continued to long after Tsuna's echoes slowed into a deep slumber. There could be no quiet entrance, using the swift fin spell for the entire journey this time. The combined group of dragons and Marin sent to re-establish communication with the shallow seas breached the entrance to the Sea of a Thousand Currents. There they were met by schools of Marin, all armed to the teeth. The elders of the Abyssal Marin, weaponless and buoyed by their Undertale companions, broke off from their group and began to sing. First with their school's ancient song, before transitioning to songs of loss, eons in the depths, aiding leviathans that harbored a deep pain, and finding a new family. After the last note was sung, the schools of Shallow Seas Marin erupted in cries of joy and jubilation. Weapons stowed, they descended on the Abyssal Marin to welcome their kin back. In between the joyful cacophony of reuniting Marin and slightly stressed explanations of their fossil gear, she could feel the dragons behind them. The schools scattered, their weapons and scales brightly glinting in the light filtering down from the surface to reveal two enormous guardian dragons, draped in what could only be regalia of the Tide Lord. They came to a stop before the largest Undertide. The Undertide elder looked the two over with a disapproving sniff before addressing them. We need to talk. So that was the lore story that accompanied the release of the Undertide Dragons. And now we have their encyclopedia entry. So they are obtained through the Arlo's ancient artifacts, where you uncover fossils with digging. They're a common ancient. Their breeding cooldown is 20 days, and they eat seafood and plants. The Undertide species originates from the deep, a span abyssal ocean out of most acknowledged elemental territories. Access to the deep can be gained by traversing the Leviathan Trench and following its southwestern exit. Physical attributes of the Undertide dragons. They are a large species of serpentine dragon. They sport a long, sinuous body and a pair of massive wings that can propel them as easily through the water as through the air. These dragons are highly adapted to rapid pressure changes and can tolerate the crushing pressure of the abyssal depths and the thin air of the stratosphere. Undertides have expressive, venomous frilled spines along their face and along their body. These dragons are capable of extracting oxygen from both water and air, and were the Tide Lord's first attempt to create dragons to expand his territory. Social. After the birth of the guardian species, the Undertide dragons abandoned the Tide Lord, exiling themselves to the deepest reaches of the wild ocean. While the Guardians performed admirably in the air, sea, and land, they were unable to easily withstand the pressures of the abyssal ocean, which led to the Undertides patrolling and protecting this biome exclusively in their exile. When these leviathans arrived in the abyssal ocean, they found that they were not alone. They formed an immediate bond with an isolated deep-sea species of Marin who welcomed them into their schools with open arms. Undertides regard the abyssal Marin as their kin and equals. Together they built a thriving underwater city called the Deep. These dragons form an expansive family, or they form expansive family units together with their Marin companions, collectively protecting and raising their young together. Layers. The Deep is a city created by Marin and Undertide in concert. An Undertide layer in the Deep need not be complicated. A space large enough to accommodate several worms nested together and a structure that they can anchor themselves to is all that is required. However, Abyssal Marin had more elaborate ideas for their cities and the homes within it to better accommodate their collective needs. They drafted the help of their Leviathan companions and together built an impressive array of spiral buildings with passages wide enough to allow the passage of Marin and Dragon alike. In the base in the bases of these conical homes, there is usually an expansive space to allow the undertide dragons to nest together, with ample nooks and crannies to anchor to. The further up the spiral one travels, the more specialized and the smaller the rooms, allowing the Marin the comforts of smaller spaces of their own. Undertides who venture out the depths and onto the surface will create burrows and muddy banks if left to their own devices. When offered an established space large enough, they will lair in most any pre-made structure provided it is filled with the vibrations and echoes of fellow dragons. When they need to rest, they will seek the companionship of others and attempt to slumber and entangle with the rest of their clan. Tactics. Undertide dragons are slow to act on their anger and will try to negotiate and accommodate rather than engage in combat. If pushed to violence, their spines and muscular bodies can envenom and constrict. Their bite is tenacious. They can drag their opponents into crushing depths or dizzying heights. Though Undertides are a formidable opponent in air and sea, they are ungainly and encumbered on land. A grounded Undertide is a vulnerable one. And that's that for the Undertide release. I really like this ancient breed. It took me by surprise when it released. I wasn't quite expecting something like the Undertides, but they grew fairly quickly on me than the other ancients have. That might just be because they feel the most water, as opposed to the other ancients feeling more like their elements, but maybe that's just me. That might just be my opinion. I know some other users of Flight Rising have taken a while to adjust to their design, but I really like them. And thanks for joining me. Till next time.